Generally what I've seen is that like when somebody tries something, like they start with psilocybin, then they realize that the psychedelic that they can work with, they're then open to potentially other compounds and finding the specific way in which they can beneficially, experience it.
All right, guys, welcome to Mushroom Talk. I am your host, Alejandro. We are being greeted by the amazing Greg Kubin, who is the host of Business Trip, the GP at Psychedelic Medicine Syndicate. And he is right now really embracing reminders. I just wanted to bring that fun fact about him, and we'll talk a little bit about it. Greg, our relationship started on Twitter and now has evolved in many different facets, speaking about life, microdosing, engagement, psychedelics, business, entrepreneurship. Thank you so much for being here, brother. I really appreciate you because you are a wealth of knowledge. So I'm excited to have you here for our audience to learn from you, man.
I'm excited to be here, grateful to be here, and let's get into it.
Bro, so tell me a little bit about this reminders thing. Like, what's going on in that world?
I like to remind myself of things that are important to me. And about a year ago, I started writing a little book that each page has a specific reminder to myself. So, for example, one page is about a reminder about following my own intuition. Another page is a reminder of gratitude. Another page is a reminder that sometimes the answer is outside of me and I need to go to others. So it's just like a little book that I keep, and occasionally I'll like leaf through and find the reminder that I need on that given day. But what I've realized is that the reminder, I'm not always ready to go to the book. The book isn't always handy. And speaking of handy, I started to occasionally write the reminders on my hands, on my finger in particular. And so, for example, this is actually a reminder from yesterday that's a bit faded, but this reminder says, be me. And so when I read that, I'm like, okay, like, yes, I'm reminding myself to like, be myself. Don't be somebody for somebody else. So I've been thinking recently about like, is there a way to move from just a writing on my finger to like maybe making a ring or some kind of, I don't know if it's jewelry or whatnot, that like actually is that nice, gentle reminder to myself. So kind of thinking about making a few things for myself. And
so why not a tattoo? Why not create a tattoo where you can have it on your finger or you can have it the constant reminder?
The reason I would not get a tattoo today, maybe that could change in the future, is because if I find that if I have the same reminder over and over and over and over and over again, it gets diluted. And I prefer to kind of switch it up. And sometimes it's not. There's a multitude of reminders that are out there, and so yeah. Sometimes like with a tattoo, it's not just that one message, but there could be a different message that I need to hear. And so if I were to get a tattoo, it'd probably be removable.
Concept of novelty, I love it. I love it. Keeping it fresh. In terms of keeping it fresh, man, you launched this podcast called Business Trip. It's psychedelic entrepreneurship. What got you to start it? What was the curiosity like? And what has been some of your favorite episodes or the things that you've learned about the industry as a whole?
Yeah. So I'm an entrepreneur and I started my first company 7 years ago now. And I love the process of startups and starting up. And I find it to be super interesting when there's a problem to be solved. And I love founders who, basically do what it takes to bring a new product or service or solution into the world. So that's been something over the last, almost decade that I've been like very much interested in embodying and love working with founders. At the same time, I find that psychedelics and psychedelic medicine is another big area of interest of mine that I think can, have tremendous therapeutic application and can be an amazing tool for introspection. Also, there's a place for just betterment of one's life and recreational side of things. So I think that the psychedelics can really just, when used responsibly and with intention, I think are just like this phenomenal tool. And so, over the last few years, there's just been like a tremendous amount of research that's demonstrating the efficacy of psychedelic medicine for healing. And so about a year and a half ago, I kind of started to look into the research deeper and kind of started to get the feeling, the pull, the intuitive pull that like there was a movement building here, kind of like the third wave of psychedelic medicine, as some like to say. And one thing I've noticed about myself is I'm usually good at seeing things between 9 months and 3 years before it happens. That's usually like the window of time of like when I'm like, this is happening. There's something interesting happening here. And so I was like, okay, I want to get involved in a deeper way. And one of my best friends, Matthias, similar to me, has both the interest in entrepreneurship and the interest in psychedelic medicine. And so we kind of put our heads together and we're like, all right, this is a space that we think you can get really, involved in, and we think that we can help this movement succeed. And so I've always liked interviewing people. I always love conversations, and I find interviewing great because often each human being has like a wealth of knowledge and information within themselves that often needs to get pried out, right? We don't always just voluntarily share what our feelings and thoughts are on something. And I look at interviewing as a medium where you're kind of adding salt to a piece of food. Salt brings the flavor out to the people. And so the idea of doing a podcast about psychedelic entrepreneurship just felt right. It was like, all right, let's interview founders of companies and organizations within psychedelics that are bringing, psychedelic medicine to the market, so to speak, to beyond just the fringes, to our culture, our society. And it's just that each episode we talk about the founding stories. We talk about the new protocols that are being developed, the therapeutic potential of psychedelic medicine, and really ranging from not just psilocybin, but ketamine, DMT, MDMA, and novel compounds that are being developed that we don't even exist yet. And the fact that like those will be coming to the world over the next decade is super interesting and exciting.
I love that you're focused on psychedelics as a whole. And so from that perspective, what has been like your own journey with psychedelics, and when did that interest begin, and what sparked it? What was that intuitive call? When was it?
Yeah. Well, I would say my first experience was in college and with mushrooms, and I had an ego dissolving experience. And so what I mean by that is I, for the first time in my life, was able to see myself from the third person, was able to really view myself in a very objective way, and was able to kind of look at my own behaviors and actions and see kind of where I was lying to myself in various manifestations of my life. And also in that experience it was a bit mystical.
What do you mean by mystical?
Mystical as in there was feelings around it. There was something to the experience that I couldn't put words to, didn't feel like it was of this plane, of this like of the human reality experience as I had previously experienced. The word that's often used is ineffable. Ineffable being like where it's an experience where you don't have words for. So yeah, so it was. So in college, I had a few of those types of experiences, and frankly, I didn't really have a proper understanding of set and setting, which is really important to understand around like having the right mindset and being in the right setting. At that point in time, it was more, I would say, social and more experimental. And then there was this gap in my life over the next few years where I graduated college. I actually worked in banking. I worked in media. I went more, I would say, corporate, and lost touch with that part of myself and just kind of part of the system, so to speak. Then I got into entrepreneurship, started my first company, and I would say Burning Man was an interesting inflection point where
When did you go to Burning? What was your first burn?
2016. And, being on the playa and being around people who are very open-minded.
How would you describe Burning Man for our listeners who haven't attended?
So I like to think of it as it's a city. Imagine a city of 70,000 people that come together for 1 week, building basically everything that encompasses that city from scratch. And then after that week, it's gone. So that's one kind of dimension of Burning Man. I would say another dimension of it is like, what's filling that city? Well, it's filled with a ton of art. It's filled with a lot of music. There's a lot of what are called sound camps. There are similar to art. There's the art cars, which are these basically like floats that you'd find typically in a parade, but are each individually made by the community. There's no money being exchanged. It's also very active participation. You're not supposed to go to watch. You're supposed to go to be part of it, and it's radically inclusive. So the idea is that there's no VIP. There's none of that crap, and so when you put all those pieces together, it's like this every day on the playa will be different to every other day on the playa. One of my, magical. One of my favorite experiences was like walking down away near where I was camping one year, and I looked down and this like remote control car drives up to my feet, and I look down and there's chips on it and there's guacamole on it. And I'm just like, amazing. And I'm looking around and like, I have no idea who drove this up to me. And I like bend down and I eat a chip and I'm just like waving, grateful for whoever sent that to me. So there's a lot of that like kind of weirdness and whimsy. And like, I love that stuff. So
it's really awesome. So how was this a catalyst in your psychedelic experience or path?
Well, I mean, I would say a few things. One is like, there are a lot of participants there who do psychedelics in various forms. And so had, I would say, more exposure in that way there. And I could see how it could be used in an environment that kind of had destigmatized it. It's not something there that is, it's like, because it's part of the culture, it feels like, okay, this is a place where one could do it without necessarily feeling like they are, being judged in their own use of it. Yeah, I would say that in particular. I would also say that like, just like kind of moving along in the years beyond Burning Man, I started to really see and understand the therapeutic potential. Like, I feel like it was around then that I started to understand that like, wait, psychedelics are not just to be used in a recreational setting with other people hanging out, but rather it can be its own really healing. They can be a tool used for healing when used individually and in an inward capacity. And I find that to be a pretty big paradigm shift to how in my own life and I would say culturally, how they were perceived. Like when I think about, for example, in the late 60s, let's say, like psychedelic use was really social, right? And it was like going to a festival and doing it amongst others. Whereas over the last few years in particular, there's been this rise in the use of them where you are, laying down, eye mask on, going inward. And so I think there's this like interesting shift happening between it being like social in nature to inward individualist in nature. And I think that when that happens, like there's less distraction, frankly, and you can really work with your own trauma or anxieties or other indications that people want to heal.
And in terms of that healing, of that desire to heal, what are some of the things that you are undertaking right now in your psychedelic medicine syndicate? How does that kind of connect? Help me connect those dots.
Yeah. So after starting the podcast, we, as Matthias and I got deeper into the space and understanding, okay, here are the different modalities, here are different companies that are basically bringing psychedelic medicine to the world. We met a amazing person named Dina Burkett-Bayeva, who had been investing in psychedelics for a few years or about a year and a half at that point. And so she really was like one of the first investors in this space. We kind of realized that our ethos was very much aligned. We saw kind of the world in a similar way. We saw that there was a way to invest in what we like to say is in the spirit of the medicine. And so
what do you mean by that?
It's hard to give it an exact definition because I feel like spirit in its very nature is like hard to define. So I think one component of it is not prioritizing, like when I think about spirit of the medicine in the context of commercialization, it's not putting like the growth of a company ahead of the healing of an individual. I think that's really important. I think the second component of it is ensuring that, the idea of psychedelics aren't put on somebody, but rather an individual, when they're ready, can step forward and raise their hand that it's something that they want to engage with and participate in. That's, I think, really important. And also part of, I would say, some like shamanic cultural like heritage You shouldn't like force it upon somebody.
So in terms of investing, then let's go dive into this because it's really awesome. So I come to you, I'm a founder, right? I have this dope idea, have amazing things, I have the right protocols, I have the right scientists, right?
Yep.
Like, let's call it that way. And I come to you and I'm saying like, hey, Greg, I'd love for you to invest in my company. What are the things you look for in the founder? Let's talk about that from
yes. Okay.
From
That's
a
a good
founder's
question.
perspective.
That's a great question. So, I mean, first of all, like, what are the reasons you're in it? Are you in it for the long haul? Like, that's number one. And that's important because, like, with any startup, this is not like a overnight thing here. Most startups take 7 to 10 years to like come to fruition. And so understanding like who the individual is and what their spirit is, and understanding like, is this somebody who is in it for the long period of time, I think is really critical. I think another factor that we would consider is, does the founder have experience with the medicine? And that's important often because...
So let's talk about that, because often there's some founders actually out there who are incredible scientists. They're chemists, organic chemistry. They know how to synthesize whatever it is, separate compounds, and yet they've never experienced it themselves.
Yeah.
What do you say to that?
I would have a conversation trying to unpack as to why they maybe haven't had experience with it. I think it's important. I think it's as simple as that, because...
is it a non-negotiable? Is it a deal killer?
No, but what I would say is they can bring people onto their team who have experience. That's like my recommendation there. Like, try to round out the team with people who can kind of speak to the experience, because what you're getting at, like, it's one thing to have an understanding of the neuroscience and the chemistry and just like actually creating the compounds. And then it's another thing to be able to deeply empathize with your patient and your customer and the person who you're actually going to be making this thing for. And I think that there are limitations about that level of empathy if you don't have experience. And so therefore, to round out that empathy is to bring somebody onto the team or an advisor or someone who can like provide that perspective. That way you can, make sure that you're empathizing. Yeah.
So we have long-term vision, empathy. What's the third thing that you look for in a founder when you're investing?
Another one would be their ability to evangelize, and that manifests both in their ability to attract an amazing team and their ability to raise money. The reality is, a lot of the companies in this space, particularly ones that are taking more of like a pharmaceutical approach, as in like they're developing a compound and they're taking it through clinical trials. It's really expensive. The capital required to take a drug or therapy through FDA is more than $100 million typically. And so you need somebody who can raise that money, and somebody who can tell that story, and somebody who people want to get behind. And like, you want to take an extreme example outside of psychedelics, like Elon Musk is like, he's a character, but like, the dude is a visionary who can evangelize and can bring top talent to the company, and was able to kind of get a company like Tesla to where it is now. That's like an extreme example outside of this space.
To your point on that, when I look at my angel investments, the question I ask myself is always like, can this person start a cult?
I mean, that's a valid question. Exactly. I mean, you could argue a company is a cult in some ways, and don't forget, like, the word culture has the word cult in it. So if you're creating company culture,
you got to create a cult.
You got to pick and choose components of the cult, let's say, without going full on.
Right. Don't drink the Kool-Aid that has the wrong stuff in it.
Exactly.
That's good. Brother, I'd love to get your opinion on, from your business perspective, because I love that you were highlighting long-term vision, empathy, cult-like evangelism.
Yep. I want to give a fourth attribute.
Let's go. Rock it. Let's do it.
Agility, speed, nimbleness. In startup world, that's just so critical, and that manifests in ways around like responsiveness. It manifests in ways around, because when you think about it, like, you need to be constantly iterating on your process.
Sense of urgency is important. Yeah,
exactly. And so that sense really manifests in an important way. So I think that's if we were to add a fourth, that I would add that.
All right. So you have essentially highlighted, if anyone's listening and you guys want to participate in psychedelic medicine syndicate, you guys already have the playbook. Greg gave it to you. So just shout out to him. And I love that you have empathy there. Like, I think that's something that a lot of investors don't look for. Mm-hmm. Right. And I just want to commend you on that, because this is the first time I'm hearing that empathy. From that perspective, what do you say to the narrative that's happening now with all these psychedelic companies going public, especially in Canada, right? And this company who's patenting these concepts that are simple as like holding hands, soft furniture, set and setting, right? Like you were saying, like how important set and setting is. How do you feel about these companies that are taking on these challenges or these aspects of patents of something that's so delicate to the actual medicine itself?
Yeah, it's complicated is the first, my first response. There's parts of it that I don't like, the idea of patenting hand-holding, that feels a bit of like an overextension. But the flip side of it is, one thing about patents and the patent process is, the typical process is a company will, or an individual, who, whatever you're patenting, they'll typically initially go for a really broad patent portfolio. They'll really try to be broad in terms of what they're trying to patent. And then the patent process typically involves a negotiation with the patent office. And it's at that point that it kind of gets pulled back, and you ultimately agree on specific components of your actual, that ultimately becomes part of the patent. And so when I see something like a very broad patent claim, my initial intuition is like, okay, they're basically playing the game that their lawyers are telling them to play, because that's how the game is played. And so it's one of these,
is intention important to you? Like, just like, even though the patent may not be granted, right? Just the fact that they spent, it's not cheap to file patents, right? Attorney fees, legal fees, patent fees, like there's a full process behind it.
Yeah.
What do you say to the intention of that?
It's not raising the vibrations. That's what I would say.
Yeah, man. I love your perspective on it. I know it's a delicate subject, especially as an investor, because you want to kind of capitalize on your return and protect the IP that's being developed. Protection is important. Moats are important in the marketplace. And I love that you mentioned vibrations. And this is something that you and I have spoken about in our conversations individually, the role of spirituality in psychedelics. What has been your journey around spirituality, and how do you see spirituality playing a role in the ecosystem as a whole?
Well, this has been an interesting year for me from a spiritual perspective, because I've been just educating myself on different manifestations of spirituality. I've been reading books. I've been speaking to people. I've thought about creating a podcast on this topic because it's fascinating to me. A friend recently had a really nice way of putting it, where she said that spirituality is a ocean with many shores. And so there's lots of different sort of paths to experiencing spirituality. And so, what's interesting, as I'm kind of putting all the pieces together, in some form, sometimes that manifests through a near-death experience, where people have, basically feel like they're having an out-of-body experience, and they're near some kind of light, some kind of higher being, and then they decide they're going to, not they decide, but they come back to their body with a sense of intention, like, wow, I need to be focusing on very specific things in my life now, that only through that experience do they get the message from source, let's call it. It seems like psychedelics is another sort of shore where people can access a feeling of spirituality. DMT, 5-MeO-DMT is called the God molecule. Lots of people have the experience of sensing God in that experience. And at the same time, another shore, so to speak, and this is very fresh for me, but one thing that I'm trying to understand better, which I find to be fascinating, is just the idea of past lives and past life regression, and people basically having this feeling of, not this feeling, but like very specific memories of different lives that were 50 years back, hundreds of years back. And it's just like, it feels super woo.
Have you explored your past lives?
I have not explored my past lives, but I do have a friend who's a healer, and she told me that I'm from another galaxy in a past life.
Like how does that land for you, man? Because I know how important.
I don't know. I didn't disagree when she said it. I was like, I was like, all right, that could make sense. And then I think what's super interesting about all this too is I've been reading about shamanic culture and shamanic traditions, and basically the ethos among lots of different shamanic cultures kind of points to this idea that like our soul, we have our soul, and our experience on earth is where we're basically embodying our physical bodies for like this temporary period of time. And our goal is to basically align with our soul's purpose over this period of time. And then after this period of time, you basically go back into like the collective consciousness, and then over the next period, like after a certain period of time, you come back to another body. And I find it to be super interesting that lots of different cultures are experiencing this. And at the same time, what's interesting where culture is at, I don't know if you've seen the movie Soul by Pixar, but like,
dude, that's spot on, right?
Yeah. So I'm like keeping my eye on this idea of like spiritual awakening happening, because I'm hearing about this from lots of different sources. And
are you getting these signals or like these
synchronicity? Exactly. And so,
right, seeking you shall find, right?
But you got to be mindful about like sharing this too, because you share like this idea with somebody who's not open to it, or is less interested, or hasn't sort of, it's just not something that is on their radar. And like, it's like, okay, Greg. Interesting.
Thanks.
Yeah, exactly.
It just drops, I love that, because I learned from Tim Ferriss back in 2014. Actually, I don't remember. 2014, Tim Ferriss had the Tools of Titans book. And there's a page where he talks about psychedelic experiences. And he says the concept of holding on to the goal, right? Like when you have these incredible journeys, these manifestations, these moments where you feel like you are one with God, or you are the universe or creator, whatever you want to call it, right? And you come back to earth and they're so special, right? That sometimes you just want to share with individuals who can understand and reciprocate that nurturing of that moment, because so many times we come back and we share it with that person that's just at the water cooler in our office. It's like, yo, dude, this is what happened. And they're like, all right, Greg, cool. Right. And it kind of like diffuses a little bit of that joy or of that moment that you had. And I love that you speak to that. And so how do you feel like in your own experience that psychedelics bring divinity and spirituality, or how does it enhance it? Like how has that psychedelics played a role in spirituality in your world?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's made me more open to it all. It's made me be open to. I've come to no conclusions. I think that's important. So let's check back in a year and see where I'm at. But like, it's made me more open to the idea of multiple dimensions. It's made me open to the idea of source. It's made me understand just like the origins of religion, broadly speaking. And there are a lot of people who are doing really interesting work around work and research into like, the intersection of religion and psychedelics as well. Because oftentimes people are, whether it's having a feeling of oneness, having a feeling that like they themselves, like God is within them. But then at the same time, there are there are certain experiences that people have, for example, with DMT, where they're reporting seeing and being around spirit, entities that they're interacting with. And so what's super interesting is like, when you go back to indigenous cultures, these are things that they've been dealing with, and is like frankly part of their culture, right? Like the shaman is often leaving their body for can be days at a time to go and like interact with the spirit realm. And so I think that like the Western side of culture is just starting to scratch the surface on this and realizing that like there's something potentially really interesting here. So yeah, I mean, it's created more openness for me in this domain.
That's really wonderful. And what do you think in terms of spirituality, psychedelics, and the role that integration has? Like, because a lot of people feel like they just speak about the experience, they speak about the thing. The next day they journal about it, and then boom, they're back into their world, right? So,
Yeah.
What is the role of integration? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's so important. Properly integrating these types of experiences. It's challenging. Is my initial reaction. And when I say it's challenging, like what I'm finding is that in order to really integrate, for me, it requires a daily practice in the mornings. The mornings when I'm fresh and I haven't looked at my phone. I haven't had basically interactions with the outside world of anyone except my wife. And a daily ritual of, for me, it's journaling, it's meditating, it's reading. Like I really try to establish a daily sense of like, all right, let me remember and remind myself about like what I'm at, where I'm at, and what I believe, and just like basically not be influenced by what's on Twitter, what's on television, what is the unread messages in my phone, because I find that if I expose myself to that stuff, for example, too early in my day, I lose that the integration kind of is diluted a little bit. And so, yeah, the short answer is it's really hard. And a part of me thinks that maybe there will be more disconnection that may be necessary.
That's beautifully stated, man.
Yeah, but it's also like it's a weird thought.
What makes it weird?
It's like we have like this world as we know it, and what it implies is is more of a disconnection from the world as we know it, and being more mindful about what aspects of the world I want to engage in. And so, yeah, I think what makes it weird is like acknowledging that there may be components of the world that don't want to expose myself to.
Yeah, that's perfectly stated, man, and beautifully and eloquently said. With that, speaking about worlds, where do you see the psychedelic world in 5 years? Like if you had a magic wand, like paint us the picture.
I'd say a few things. One is I see a world where there's less stigma associated with psychedelic use. And I think that stigma will be prompted by more people kind of coming out with their own positive experiences that, and people being not just people like you or me, but like the Tim Ferrisses of the world, so to speak, in a way that like, I think just simply destigmatize what the use of psychedelics responsibly. I see more people having more of like a ritualistic kind of relationship with psychedelics, and basically for some people that may mean coming back to psychedelics on a yearly basis, on a quarterly basis, or from a microdosing perspective on a daily basis in small amounts. And so I see more just like more of it being integrated into the daily lives of people in a way, but in the context of being able to speak more openly about it. I see there being a more knowledge and understanding of like the breadth and the wide range of psychedelics that are both available and being developed. So generally what I've seen is that like when somebody tries something, like they start with psilocybin, then they realize that that's the psychedelic that they can work with. They're then open to potentially other compounds and finding the specific way in which they can beneficially, experience it. And so, I would say just like there being more of an openness to the range of compounds. I'm really interested in MDMA because I think that MDMA has, with the work that BAPS is doing in particular, but like the feeling of openness and connection and oneness, and really, again, when you think about it in the form of working with it with psychotherapy, it's just like so valuable and so beautiful for so many people to heal. And so I'm really curious to see, or not even curious, but I think that like MDMA and MDMA assisted therapy will be a really popular therapy modality because I think that it has so much promise. And then I think the internet is going to play an interesting role in all of this, for good and for bad.
Tell me more about this.
I think for good because, this conversation will be shared on the internet, right? And people's positive experiences will be shared on the internet. And I think the internet is a vehicle for word of mouth. And psychedelic experiences are so impactful that as more people experience them and destigmatization decreases, you're just going to have more of psychedelic experiences kind of being in the air, as something that is available to people for those who want to seek it out. And then the flip side of it is there can be a dark side where, whether it's people having adverse experiences with psychedelics and that can happen because of the wrong setting. That could happen because people who maybe shouldn't be taking them to begin with because of their own, predispositions to, for example, schizophrenia and having psychotic breaks. Like those things do happen. And I think that those stories will also be amplified through the internet. And I think that it's possible that people will record their entirety of their trips and share it on the internet. That's probably happening if you go on YouTube already. And so I think more of those stories will be amplified. And so I think that I think that basically there will be a place in culture where psychedelics really have a hold in a way that we kind of are getting a scratch of the surface of today, but I think it will be in a much deeper way in 5 years.
Wow, that's really powerful. And let me ask you about this adoption. Do you feel like legalization, where we will be in terms of legalization?
Well, so there's a few pathways to psychedelic access, right? The first pathway is, you just mentioned legalization, which is just actual, the U.S. government or other governments legalizing broad psychedelic use. The second pathway is the FDA that basically approves psychedelics as medicine. And that doesn't require, psilocybin to be legalized. That can just be approved as medicine. And then the third pathway is local decriminalization, which also is not legalization. Anything that becomes decriminalized becomes the lowest form of a crime that the local police are basically told not to prioritize. So in 5 years from now, I foresee multiple states in the United States having basically approved the use of psychedelics for therapeutic purposes, probably not for recreational purposes on the state level, but maybe that is possible. Those states probably being more West Coast states. So we're already seeing it in Oregon, but California, Washington, Canada as a country has been pretty progressive. And then I think a few companies will, and or organizations like MAPS will have received approval from the FDA for MDMA therapy, for psilocybin therapy. And so those will be more broadly available. And then there are some countries in the world that don't really have strong laws or don't have laws about enforcing psychedelic use. And so whether that's Jamaica or Portugal, exactly.
Amsterdam, the Netherlands, yeah.
Exactly. So there will be access is my there will be access, but I think that the initial phase, at least from the investing the world I'm in, so much of the focus has been on the FDA pathways, because when the FDA approves something, it's kosher.
Wow. What a wealth of knowledge, Greg, about that. Where can our audience find you on the interweb, on the real world? How can we get connected to you?
Yeah. I'm on Twitter at Kubins. And where else? I'm a little of everywhere. I don't know. Send me an email. I love emails. greg@businesstrip.fm. And I love meeting people. I love connecting people. I love building community. So, if you're a person who's interested in learning more about the stuff that I'm thinking about or working on, or if I can be helpful, if I can be a resource, the word resource has kind of stuck with me recently.
Is that one of your reminders now?
Be a resource. Yeah, it should be. It isn't yet, but I'll add it to the book. I'll make a ring.
There it is. And there's so much more I'm definitely going to have you back, Ben, because there's so much more that we can talk about. Everything from gene expression, delivery methods, sister compounds, just thinking about the whole concept of psychedelics in the human body. I can't wait to tap into that. So we'll definitely have you on for a second follow-up.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and along those lines, I think one of the coolest things to me has been so many of the applications of psychedelics, not just for mental health and things like depression, anxiety, OCD, but also for substance use disorders, for inflammation, which is linked to all sorts of diseases. It's just like there's so many different potential applications. And so, yeah, future conversation, we'll go deeper.
Thanks, Greg. All right, guys, this has been Mushroom Talk. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please leave a review, a comment, share with your friends, and you guys can find us at Mushroom Talk on all the platforms, Twitter, Instagram. I don't know so much about Facebook these days, but if you're there, we'll be there as well. Thanks, guys. Have a good day.